Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. Everybody, in today's episode, we are going to be discussing nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is actually not what is generating commercial electricity today. That is nuclear fission. Nuclear fusion has been said to be 30 years out for quite some time now, since like before the 1960s, I believe. And I brought somebody in to discuss nuclear fusion at a high-level overview. He just so happens to be one of the leading experts in nuclear fusion research and development. And he is joining me today from Princeton University. He is Sir Stephen Charles Cowley. Welcome to Elemental Energy, Steve.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. Will you please give yourself a further introduction so everybody knows who we're listening to today?
Well, I'm the director of the US's fusion research lab, which is called the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab. And this is one of the legendary places in this research. This was the first place in 1994 that ever produced any significant amounts of fusion power. We produced 10 million watts of fusion power for a whole second in 1994 in one of our experiments. And that was the first time we ever saw, any controlled generation of fusion power. And it was a remarkable point. The history of fusion has been peppered by difficulties. And because what we're trying to do is reproduce the way the stars remain hot, which is to join together small nuclei to make bigger nuclei, hence the word fusion, right? You're fusing together small nuclei of atoms to make bigger nuclei of atoms. And this can give you energy. And it is indeed what powers the stars. But the difficulty is you've got to create the conditions in the middle of a star on Earth. And that is in hundreds of millions of degrees in temperature. And at those temperatures, the nuclei will be running around at such speed that when they collide, they'll get over their mutual repulsion and stick together. And when you can make that happen, you can have a controlled fusion experiment. But the difficulty is, how do you hold something at 100 million degrees? It seems bafflingly hard. The way we do it in this lab is we heat our fusion fuel, which is two kinds of hydrogen. Heavy hydrogen, which is called deuterium, and super heavy hydrogen, which is called tritium. And we heat those fuels up inside a cage of magnetic field. So it doesn't touch the walls. It's held in this cage. And as it's held in the cage and we heat it up to those temperatures, it begins to make fusion happen. The trick has been that it's been very hard to make a cage of magnetic field that is sort of steady and stable. Holding something in a magnetic cage is a bit like trying to hold a lump of Jell-O with a knitting wool. You're kind of wrapping the wool around a lump of Jell-O and it oozes out and it doesn't stay steady and everything. And for many years, we were unable to keep the very hot fusion fuel, which we call a plasma, from throwing itself against the wall. And now that we kind of perfected making cages of magnetic field, the question is, can we turn this into a power source that'll make electricity at a cost you want to pay for?
So that is up to you to figure that amazing problem out. And you've been devoting your life to this solving fusion and making electricity commercial viable. How did you know that developing fusion was part of your purpose?
my father was a professor of engineering in England, and he was a very silent man. He thought a lot and said very little. And driving me to school one day in Cambridge, he started talking about fusion and saying, I must have been about 14 or 15. And he started talking about fusion and saying, if we could make fusion work, this would be an amazing thing because we could power the planet forever on fusion fuel. There's enough fusion fuel on the planet to basically power the planet until the planet is no more. And I thought, wow, this sounds pretty cool. And that sounds like something to work on. And I went off to college. And while in college, I kind of thought, well, it'd be nice to do a PhD because I kind of enjoy doing physics. Physics is a captivating subject to do because, you can keep yourself amused. I was flying back from England yesterday after a conference in England, and I'm on the plane and I have a piece of paper in front of me and a pencil and I'm calculating things. And I've always just enjoyed doing that. And when I went to graduate school, I came here to Princeton to go to graduate school. I had spent my life at that time in England. And so I thought I'd do something really radical and go to graduate school in Princeton. And I came here and sort of joined the project here in Princeton. And it's fascinating. We're trying to create a power source that will eventually kind of replace almost any other power source. And when that's done, we will never not know how to do fusion. I believe that we'll conquer this one day. I also believe we don't have all the right ideas now, which is kind of fun. I mean, if you want to work in this area, you don't want it to be done. You want to still have the fun of making it happen, And so after my father told me about it, that's kind of what I thought I would probably do. And I've ended up, spending most of my life just thinking about that problem. We've made a lot of progress, and we are at a point where we can actually do some fusion. The question now becomes, can we do fusion cheap enough and sustainably and, repeatably in order to replace coal, gas, oil in our energy supply? And so it's the biggest question of the 21st century. If we solve fusion, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, Steve, you're just about to say, if we solve this, and I think it might be where I'm going, will you please paint a vision of what our future looks like if we solve fusion?
Well, if we solve it, and solve it means do it, being able to do it at a cost the consumer wants to pay, we can stop burning fossil fuels, and we can start on a sustainable energy economy that will be sustained forever, which produces no pollution, no adverse impacts on the environment. It'll probably go alongside wind and solar and be part of the mix. But it's a crucial part of the mix because fusion is what we call a firm energy source. You can turn it off when you don't need it. You can turn it on when you do need it. And unlike wind and solar, which are only available when the sun shines or the wind blows, this is it's firm. You can do it when you want it. And so I believe that fusion will play a critical role in our energy supply in the future. The question is when. The sooner, the better. And a world, civilization has been powered by energy. I come from Britain, and Britain was, famously the first industrialized country. The Industrial Revolution came to Britain a little earlier than, say, continental Europe. And that was coal. And that changed lives immensely because you were able to, do things with that energy to make products and do this and do that, and everything is powered by energy. And we're at this very, very tricky time in history where the way we have been producing energy, which is burning fossil fuels, has to stop. Because otherwise our planet is going to warm and the adverse weather effects are going to be dreadful for people, especially people who don't have much, the Bangladeshis or the people living in floodplains, the people, who are existing on very low incomes. And so fusion is necessary. We just have to do it.
Well, you say that we just have to do it, but from where you also started is the fact that we're already doing fusion. We've already produced it. It's just really refining how to keep it in a stronger, more sustainable manner in order for it to start being commercially not productized, but used as a commercial electricity production source. But we've already accomplished fusion. So help us see a bigger picture of where we are at commercially, because I said earlier, everybody states it's 30 years away, it's 30 years away, but why are we seeing so much private funding in the sector right now? And give us an overview of where we truly are right now.
That's been very interesting. The last 5 years has seen a huge amount of private capital flow into fusion startup companies. These are companies often headed by very ambitious and very excitable, in a way, early career people. And that is beginning to change the world in which I've spent my career, because I spent the career in a sort of academic look at how you might do this, et cetera, et cetera. Now people are saying, come on, we have to be more focused on an end product. And I think that that's going to help us speed up the delivery of fusion. Now, there are a number of problems to solve. I mean, we know technically there are a number of problems to solve. We can do fusion, but we have to convert that heat that's produced from fusion into commercial electricity. And the technologies of doing that, we have ideas, but we've never actually done it. So, we're looking at more than a decade before we're really producing electricity. And then, if you want to ask how long will it take to really impact the world energy supply? Well, you probably have to have 1,000 fusion plants in operation for a real big impact. And that's going to take several decades. But we're on the home game a bit at the moment. You can see the end of the road, which when I came into the field, you couldn't really see the end of the road. You could say, if we solve this, this, and this, well, maybe we'll be closer.
Steve, with ITER and the large fusion reactor, how much money has been put into it so far and how many different companies are a part of it? Can you remind me, please?
Well, so ITER, which is, I say ITER, some people say ITER. It's an experiment that's funded by 7 large countries. The European Union is the biggest partner. The US, Russia, China, Japan, India, Korea are all partners. And I don't think I missed one out. And that machine is taking what we know now and saying, let's make a sustained fusion burn. That's when the fusion reaction sustains itself. And it's a bit like when you've lit the fire, it actually keeps burning without you doing anything, right? And if you pump in more fusion fuel, it'll keep going even then, right? And that experiment is very conventional and has been very expensive. It's over $20 billion worth of investment. And big companies have been involved, companies, like Atkins and Jacobs, and these are big engineering companies, have been involved in making that device. It still isn't started, but it's getting close. And it's kind of the conventional look at how we do fusion. I think Princeton, as a lab, we're focused on trying to make it smaller, faster, cheaper, because we believe that, that you actually have to do something to lower the cost. And I think we have some really good ideas, and we're showing that you can do this at smaller scale and perhaps at less cost. And so that's kind of the focus now. And a lot of these startup companies, there's something like 60 startups that have founded in the last 5 years. And a lot of these companies have ideas to make it easier, cheaper, and faster. And you just get enough human ingenuity and, things are going to really really pick up speed. The US government the Biden administration has committed to what they call a bold decadal strategy to deliver fusion. Now, decadal, I would say, doesn't mean exactly within the decade, but it does mean within 2 decades, in my view. And this means sometime in the 2030s, I think we will see the first electricity from fusion. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm getting older, but I'm really looking forward to the era when we're actually producing something out of fusion.
Maybe when everybody was saying it's 30 years away, they forgot to put the 20 in front of the 30. So it's 2030. Everybody was predicting it. We just couldn't see it yet.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So,
no.
Steve, something that really impacted me when I was at the From Ambition to Reality Summit is how your team is utilizing AI to develop some of these designs. I mean, it makes sense that you're making something smaller, hence small modular reactors in the fission space, that you're taking a bigger size and making it smaller. It just seems to make so much sense. Like, where did that thought process come to you and your team to downsize these large facilities in order to help containment? Like,
I think we've had that worry for 20 years, really, that we're going in a direction where, we may be able to do fusion, but it'll be too expensive. And that we have to focus our energies on, making it cheaper and producing something that will actually fit in the market. And so the machine we have at Princeton, which we're just upgrading, is a more compact design. But this idea of now turning the power of artificial intelligence and supercomputing on the job of optimizing is something we really started maybe 4 years ago. Started thinking about how would you do that. And, it's enormously complicated because you can imagine this thing that's at 100 million degrees is wriggling all over the place, and the magnetic fields have to hold this. And then you have to worry about it's surrounded by a solid wall, and then around that is the coils that make the magnetic field. All these things go into how much it's going to cost. And so we have to integrate not only science, but engineering, and to some extent projections of cost, in order to find, the optimum configuration. The optimum configuration is not the best physics. Optimum configuration is the least cost. And so that involves a lot of things apart from just science. And we're working on that. And the Department of Energy has given us money to think about that. And we're producing some of the early career people in the lab have produced some marvelous new configurations that look much more promising. At the moment, we don't have money to build any of them. So we're doing more and more computer simulations to try and refine our ideas until we get to the point that's ready to build. But we've got 2 or 3 of the private companies interested in this approach. So I'm pretty optimistic that this is actually the way to do it.
Steve, I think I support it fully, because I'm looking at the constraints right now that we're having with uranium fuel sources and just typical fission fuel sources, and what we're having to figure out and overcome. And it's so hard, whereas I look at fusion and it's just so simple. Like, yes, we still have to get the technology there, but it's a much brighter future. I have a question now. This might be very basic concept on your side, but explain to me the difference in fuel sources, like for fusion and fission. Tell me why they're on opposite sides of the periodic table. I'm sure there's some simple scientific explanation. And I think you started on that when you started talking about fusing elements together.
That's very interesting, right? The most stable nucleus is the medium-sized one,
Iron.
right? That turns out to be iron, basically, in the periodic table, the metal iron. And it's about the middle of the periodic table. And anything smaller wants to get bigger, and anything bigger than iron wants to get smaller. And so you sort of converge on iron. And the reason for this is that what dominates the structure of the atomic nucleus are 2 forces. One force is called the strong force, and it glues the nucleus together. And the nucleus is made up of protons and neutrons, and they have strong force that pulls them together and holds them together. And so every nucleus is a ball of protons and neutrons. Now, the strong force really only interacts by those protons and neutrons that are almost touching each other. But it's very close. You have to be very close for it to do. So all the neutrons and the protons only sort of attract the ones that are next to them in the nucleus. They don't attract the ones on the other side of the nucleus. They only attract the one that's next to it. But you can glue a nucleus together that way. But there's another force, and that is the electrical force, the electrostatic force, we always say. And that's because protons, which is only one of the particles in the nucleus, is a positive charge, and it repels the other protons in the nucleus. And that is a force that acts over distance. So in fact, all the protons are repelling all the other protons inside the nucleus. Now, the electrostatic force is weaker than the strong force, except when you get to very, very large nuclei. Then, because it acts over the whole of the nucleus, the protons on one side push on the protons on the other side, and it can push the nucleus apart. And that's fission. That's what uranium does, because uranium is a very, very big, pretty much the biggest ball of the nucleus that we know appears in nature. We can make bigger ones in experiments, but it's the biggest one in nature. Mm-hmm. And it's just too big. It wants to get smaller by splitting up, because the protons on one side are pushing the protons on the other side. And the strong force, which is gluing it together, right, is only interacting at short distance. But small nuclei like hydrogen, like helium, the electrostatic repulsion is not bigger than the strong force. And so the strong force holds them together, right, because there aren't many of them. And so basically what stars do is they take hydrogen and they make helium, which is the next one up in the periodic table. And then they take helium and they make carbon and they make oxygen and they make nitrogen and they make all the things that are inside your body. It's a nice thought, really, that we're all just made of stardust. And they build up inside stars until you get to iron. And anything that's bigger than iron is a mistake. It's kind of an overshoot that happens in exploding stars, like supernova explosions. And so uranium is quite rare, actually, the fuel for a nuclear reactor. And there isn't all that much of it on Earth. And so while nuclear fission is something we can do now, we can't do it for very much longer. And it does have this problem that it produces, radioactive waste. Now, I'm an advocate for nuclear power because I think it's one of the tools that we have to tackle climate change. And we have to tackle climate change now, not, 30 years from now. It's one of those tools, but it isn't the long-term future. The long-term future is fusion.
You are living so far in the future. It's amazing. And I'm thankful to have your vision now because it's helping develop that future. And since you just started touching on climate change, Steve, I usually ask all of my people as they step into this elemental energy interview is, what is your stance on climate change? And I'm very interested to hear yours in particular as a scientist, not only telling me your stance, but delivering your scientific proof for or against it.
Well, I think nobody disputes that it's happening. Some people suggest that maybe it's happening for some natural reason, that it's not caused by human beings. But I don't believe that. I think that the simulations of the effect of the increasing there's no dispute either that the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere and the concentration of methane and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are going up. So you've got two incontrovertible pieces of evidence, right? The temperature's going up and the CO2 and greenhouse gas levels are going up, right? And the question is, are they linked? And I think that there's a lot of computer calculations that show that they're absolutely intricately linked, and that's what you expect. The last fact is that the reason the CO2 is going up is we're burning fossil fuels, right? So you string those facts together, there isn't another explanation. And always be wary of people who don't believe something because it's in their self-interest not to believe it, right? Those people who want to go on burning fossil fuels because they're making money out of burning fossil fuels, you've got to be wary of anybody making that argument if they're making money from it. And it's very clear, right? We have to stop burning fossil fuels. And we have to stop really yesterday, not today. And we're going to see some climate change. And I think we need to say to ourselves, we know one way that the planet works well. That's the way we've been living in. We cannot take an experiment and see what happens if the CO2 levels go up catastrophically and we see the melting of the polar ice caps and we see, the Arctic tundra becomes basically marshes instead of frozen, and all kinds of consequences for life on Earth will happen during that time. I fear we're facing some of it, and that, we will have to do our best to live through it. But I also think it's the big challenge of our time. In a way, a challenge is good in a way because it brings us together. It says, all these petty things, you're sitting on my piece of land or you're doing this. Well, it's not really petty, but you know what I mean. When you face the fact that it's all humans, right? Nobody can get away from climate change. Now, it's true if you're rich, you can kind of shield yourself from climate change in some ways. And it's going to be the downtrodden who take the worst of the burden. But, we're in it together and we have to solve it together. And the difficulty, I think, sometimes is that environmental challenges is something in which almost we have to enforce change, because it's always in the individual's interest. It's in my interest to burn lots of fossil fuel because for me the benefit of burning all those fossil fuels far outweighs the general problem that comes from me as an individual burning fossil fuel. But if we all have that viewpoint, then we're in terrible shape. But as an individual, my choices are a little skewed. And so we do have to enforce the idea that our governments are going to have to step forward and try and stop this. When I got interested in this problem in the late 1970s, I was in high school and I was thinking about fusion and what I was going to do with my life. We thought we would run out of fossil fuels before this happened. And it's clearly not true. We got more than enough fossil fuels to really mess with the planet. And therefore, we have to stop using fossil fuels that are in the ground before we've used them up. And that's really getting to be our challenge of the next decade or two.
Thank you for putting substantiative proofs to climate change, especially from a scientific viewpoint, because I think you're living in a very progressive world. And that you said earlier that, there are people who they can't deny climate change anymore. I still have people telling me that periodicity is a thing and that the earth is just going in cycles. Like this is just part of its cycle. And I'm like, I thank you for that viewpoint, but here's XYZ to prove differently. So you given me a lot of facts to add to my repertoire. Okay, so I have two more questions. When it comes down to the safety surrounding nuclear fusion, what does that really look like for the future? Because with nuclear fission, everybody is concerned about the fallout, the nuclear radiation. They all have, TMI, Fukushima, Chernobyl stuck in their head, when in actuality, those impacts weren't as large as the media portrayed them to be. But what does the safety situation look like? Because I don't even know how to paint a picture around safety in fusion.
So fusion does not produce what we call long-lived radioisotopes. So the radioisotopes are radioactive elements. And when you have a nuclear power station powered by fission, you make a lot of those radioactive byproducts. And they become the waste. But they're not just the waste, they're the danger if you have an accident. Because what can happen if you have an accident is a release of those radioactive byproducts. And that's, what we had in Chernobyl. Chernobyl was probably the worst of the nuclear accidents. And it did cause some loss of human life, much less than we had expected, but it was still fairly serious. But fission does have that capability of doing that. Now, in fusion, we don't produce anywhere near the same amount of radioactive byproducts. And most of them are what we call very short-lived. They have anything radioactive has something called a half-life, which is half of the stuff will have decayed in that time, say 5 years. And in fact, the classic byproduct of a fusion reactor is an accidental byproduct. Fusion itself produces helium. And ordinary helium, it's not radioactive, so its major waste is just helium, right? Which is fine. You can fill birthday balloons if you want with it. But what happens is that the fusion being that hot and it produces a neutron, which is fast, it can make the walls slightly radioactive. And those radioactive walls have half-lives of about 5 years. And after 5 years, they're only half as bad. And then after 10 years, they're a quarter as bad, and et cetera, right? And so it does not have the chance of releasing a cloud of stuff that would be a problem. So we believe that fusion reactors will be able to be sited next to cities because they won't produce any smokestack, which will be polluting to people's lungs. They won't have this danger of a radioactive, cloud coming from an accident, all these things. So it really does have an incredibly safe profile. That being said, nothing is absolutely safe in the sense that, you could have an accident in which, I don't know, the electricity in the power station, injured a worker, or, or somebody inhaled a piece of the stuff in the reactor. But the consequences are tiny from any expected, and certainly far less than the damage that a coal-fired power station produces.
Steve, so that's amazing because I didn't know all of those things, but I'm sitting here and I was laughing earlier. No need for Geiger counters anymore. You can just walk around, and when somebody starts sounding a little funny, something's off there.
That's right.
Oh, okay. So last question I have is, describe how others can support this technology, because let's face it, not everybody really aspires to be a PhD in this area and, helping deliver it like actually hands in the mix of everything. But give our audience a way to walk away from this until like nuclear fusion 2030s that might be happening. Give us a how can we be a part of this and support?
Well, I think, there is, for instance, a congressional fusion caucus now. It started a few years ago, and these are Congress people who really want to see us deliver fusion as fast as possible. I think we're at a stage that people often ask me this: if we had more funding, would we go faster? And the answer is, of course, yes. If we had more funding, we could get fusion faster. And I think it's very crucial to get fusion delivered as fast as possible. And so, I think pressuring politicians to put more money into fusion is a good idea. Of course, I would think that, but I do. I think these startup companies, I'm glad to see that. I think we see attention from a large number of big tech investors in getting fusion going. And these are people who have had success in the technological world. So that's a good sign. I think the last thing to say is, there's probably, I don't know what they are, but I suspect there is a couple of ideas that we haven't really had yet. And that some smart young person who's probably in high school right now will have, smart couple of people will have these ideas which will finish the job. We're not quite finished, but we can see the end coming. And smart ideas, the airplane that was flying by the Second World War, which was 35 years after the Wright brothers flew their first airplane, didn't look at all like the Wright brothers airplane. We may get fusion going, but we'll still be developing better and better fusion reactors until we've got something that really can last forever.
Steve, I am so thankful for your time. I have 3 little girls who might be in your class one day. I hope that my scientific brain inspires them to step into this as well. But your lecturing capabilities and your teaching capabilities, that's what drew me to asking you to come join Elemental Energy, is because you have the passion. You speak so well about this. And I can't say thank you enough for joining me today and for this discussion. And I will let you closed us out beautifully. I don't have to say any more other than stay happy and stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Marsha.
Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook and connect with me, Marsha Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become. I can't wait to ask you how you did receive the title of Sir, though. I hope that's a topic I can touch in the conversation. Is that okay?
There's no, secret to it, really. I mean, it's just you get nominated by somebody that you never know.
It's still a very impressive title to hold, though. Don't discredit yourself. You were nominated for some reason that was bigger than you can imagine, I'm sure. Okay.
It was a great thrill. I was actually knighted by the Queen, the old Queen, and she was a legendary figure, and so that was an enormous honor. But can't live your life for honors. You got to do things, and you just keep doing things. I always say in life, the enemy is boredom, and I try not to be bored.